Good afternoon. Welcome to our DPC Education Center webinar of the month. Today, we're going to be talking about understanding the true cost of CKD from a therapist's personal journey. Before we begin, we have a few reminders to go over. First, all of your lines are muted, and you are able to ask questions, though, or make comments through the chat box. You'll see the chat box in the upper right part of your screen. And you can do questions or comments throughout the program, although we will be answering questions primarily at the end of the program. You'll also receive the link to the recording and the slides within a week. So please be patient for that. And we ask that you complete the feedback form that you'll find at the end of the program. So it's my pleasure to introduce today's speaker to you, Gabriel Cooper, or I can say now Dr. Gabriel Cooper, who has his PhD as a kidney patient who conducts long-term psychotherapy for individuals and couples in California. He was a type 1 diabetic and peritoneal dialysis patient until he was gifted a kidney pancreas transplant in 2021 at Cedars-Sinai. While on the transplant wait list, he earned his postgraduate degree from Cambridge University and has since dedicated himself to personally and professionally supporting other patients with chronic illnesses. At this time, Gabriel, I'm going to turn the program over to you.
Thank you, Kathy. And hello, everybody. I'm Gabriel. You can probably see me down in the screen if you're here in the app. I will stay on screen with you. If not, you can probably hear my voice. So welcome. It's a real gift and honor to be presenting this today and be here with all of you fellow kidney patients. We can go ahead and go to the next slide. Thank you for the introduction, though, Kathy. Appreciate it. So today, just a quick overview of what we are going to be doing. We'll go ahead and go through the journey of CKD in stages, and I'll go through the journey from a personal perspective and how that applied to relationships, the emotional dimensions, what happens psychologically, some of the costs there, including self-esteem, what happened to sense of meaning and belonging, and lastly, what happened to physical health. Some things you may be familiar with, and some things that are actually not talked about a lot through all these stages of kidney disease. Then we'll be talking about transplant. I was lucky enough to get to this stage, the transplant, post-transplant, and then I'll bring in some of my ideas and expertise on some of the ways that this may look psychologically, some ways to maybe understand it and where it aligns, going over resources, and then most importantly, leaving time for the questions and comments that you might have at the end. As Kathy said, you can put the questions in the chat at any time. I'll be keeping my eye on chat questions and comments, but they may also be answered at the end. So feel free to put those in there when you have them. All right, so let's go ahead and get started. A little bit of background on me so you understand the context for the story. I've had type 1 diabetes since 14. I'm the only one in my family to ever have it. I was, one of those 1 in a million cases, the lucky lottery winner there. So diagnosed at a pretty early or young age. CKD, I got my formal diagnosis at age 26 when I didn't even know what a kidney was, beyond something that I put on a salad, kidney bean, but I didn't know what it did, what it was, where it was. I am 34 years old now, cisgendered, and I put that there because I think it's important to know that I grew up feeling very, very much like I was comfortable in my body and like my body was my own. Los Angeles, California is where I live now. But before that, I grew up in a small town in Lake Tahoe, lived in San Francisco, Chicago, DC and London, landed me in Los Angeles, where I eventually received my transplant. Therapist license, I put that on there because it's really important to know. It's a 6 to 8 year journey, and it's something that I decided to start in my late 20s. So the journey was very much in line with my dialysis journey. And the educational goals around that will come into my story as well. As I said, I was raised in a small town by a single mother, marked with a lot of addiction and abuse. So education actually became really important to me and a part of my identity psychologically and my way forward in life. Athleticism played a big part in that too. That was my way to get to college for free and get it paid for. So you can see the picture there, kind of encapsulates that spirit of athleticism, as well as the ownership of diabetes on my body there with the CGM. Thought it was important to highlight that up until my diagnosis of CKD, I didn't have any psychological symptoms. My baseline was very normal, very social, naturally wired for optimism, actually, quite resilient. No psychological symptoms at all. And lastly, it's important to note my relationships here. I had a lot of close friends, and that was really helpful. However, I am an only child with an estranged mother and a father who's mostly absent. So my partner, who became my caretaker, was a really primary relationship, which can be a huge source of support, but also a huge source of stress. A little about me. All that said, I'm right here next to you. I may have a different background or statistics than you, but there are so many parts of you that I completely understand. And I encourage you to look at what's similar along our journeys as we go through these stages. So stage 1 and 2, I was actually diagnosed at stage 2. This is where my story begins, and I'll be hitting all of these aspects, relationships, what's happening emotionally, psychologically, sense of meaning, health-wise. So we'll start here with the diagnosis at stage 2, actually, of kidney failure, and that lasted a few years. My relationships were pretty normal up until, or as I had known them. Emotionally, I got this underlying sense of kind of supercharged, like this real need to live fast and die young. Knowing that I was at stage 2 of something didn't sound great, so I kind of adopted this mentality of really live fast and die young. Psychologically, I was thinking live fast and die young. So with that comes a lot of denial. For me, also came signs of addiction and escape and ways to really just live fast and not care if I died young. My sense of meaning and place in the world were also shaped largely by this diagnosis. They had been as a type 1 diabetic, knowing that my life was significantly shortened by the disease. I was diagnosed before there were CGMs and pumps and had to use manual injections. So there wasn't as good of a prognosis, but nevertheless, this diagnosis really, I think, shaped my sense of meaning. Kind of felt like the need to do everything, to move really fast through it, to be as part of as much as I could be. And this is where I saw my health subtly declining as well. The denial really kind of affected it. I couldn't afford, but also didn't prioritize insulin while I was in college. This was also before it was covered under Obamacare and free. So I didn't give myself insulin a lot. My A1C average was about 13 for a lot of my life, which is really high. I didn't check my blood sugar often, and I gave myself shots as needed. I really managed as much as I could through diet and exercise, which is not an effective strategy for type 1 diabetics. So I began to see my physical health decline. This mentality, these things are very typical of my age, which is why I mentioned them, right? Live fast and die young. Well, I was young. I still am young. So it might affect things a little bit differently. But needless to say, these stages really had a profound thread that runs through them that I think might be relevant to everybody. So we can go to the next stage. Stage 3. Relationships were still normal, but I had to work a lot harder to keep them normal. When I got stage 3, it was a pretty clear diagnosis. I was clearly in stage 3, as told by my medical team, or my doctor. I only had one doctor ever, just a endocrinologist before this. And there was a lot of, by stage 3, I began to Google things, and there's a lot of anger, sadness, depression. I still had that live fast and die young, as I'm getting closer to that, denial that comes with it, more addiction to escape what this might mean, what this might be, to escape dealing with it. And my addiction took form in substances, mostly in alcohol. Psychologically, I was feeling really invisible at this stage where I wasn't quite part of a community, but I wasn't part of the community that I had known. I was going through something that was completely invisible to others, and that others might not understand if I explained. I didn't even know how to explain it myself, and that's kind of in between stage of having something, knowing it would get worse because of my type 1 diabetes and because of the CKD. I felt like it was really not fair. I feel like at the same time, some of these feelings are contradictory, right? It's holding a lot of these at once. I also decided that I needed to make the most of my time. So I wanted to go back to school to do something to make a difference. I was working in marketing before that. I was working in luxury marketing, painting rocks different colors to sell them to rich people for a corporation. And that didn't feel, while that has benefits, what was important to me, it didn't feel right for. And that was helping understand people psychologically and guide them to better decisions in their life. So I decided to that was important to me. So I pulled the trigger, put in my 2 weeks at my high-paying job in a corner office, and followed my passion to become a therapist and help people one-on-one clinically, which was a big psychological shift. In a way, I began to fight back the disease. Began to really start to kind of fight back, be like, no, I can fight this thing. And also at stage 3, my self-esteem was starting to fade, with my behaviors and my needs becoming more apparent to me. I think a lot of the struggle I was going through, I internalized and thought, meaning that I took on as responsibility for emotionally, and kind of blamed myself for what I was going through. Just was really kind of difficult to grapple with and really lessen my self-esteem. Physically, this is where things really began to change. I had my whole leg, my veins exploded on my left calf while I was training for a marathon. And I ended up being in a cast for 6 months and had skin grafts all over my leg because the veins from the diabetes and the CKD just exploded. I had retinopathy, so I was going in to get injections in my eyes and laser surgery, but the injections were monthly at this point. Hypertension, hospitalizations began. So I got a CGM. So the technology had been available for a while, but this is where I really kind of decided to, okay, things are happening, I need to fight this. Stage 4, so we'll go on to the next stage. Relationships became strained with my needs and abilities changing. My medical team then became robust. I went from 1 doctor to 2 to 3 to 8, I think, 1 for every single issue that I had. The GP, nephrologist, endocrinologist, podiatrist, ophthalmologist. I could keep going, hematologist. It became robust and became my new family. So I was in stage 4. I changed my own therapist, my own form of treatment, not because it wasn't good, but I wanted somebody who could really understand me, who I thought would. So I changed to another gay identifying male, thinking that would make me understood more. It didn't in the end, necessarily. Emotionally, I was very confused. I remember going on runs, and sometimes I'd have to stop mid-run and just take this gulp with my life of being alone, feeling alone in this, a hopelessness, a sadness, a wanting to escape. And at the same time, having motivation, resilience, those things that I had to have. I didn't have a choice. So it was a lot of things all at once going on emotionally. Psychologically, I was bargaining. I was just trying to fight it. I was saying, well, if I do this, will I have more time? Well, if I live this way or that way, will it make a difference? Can I reverse this? Should I go faster toward the wait list to get a transplant? There was a lot of bargaining, a lot of fighting it. As my medical team would suggest and goes off of, is you have to fight this. We're seeing all these different ways to fight it back, to keep you healthy as we can. So I adopted that mentality. As I did so, it became tied, my self-esteem became tied to others, very much so, especially my partner as a caregiver. My needs were greater. And so my partner became a big source of validation and tied to my self-esteem. Here's where meaning and belonging came in for me. How was I going to let this shape my life? Interesting question for me. As I was on my licensure, my 6 to 8 year track, I was just a little bit of the way into it, or actually probably about halfway at this point. Education is a big part of my story. I worked so hard to get as best of an education as I could. So I wanted to continue that to become a doctor or get a terminal degree. So I applied to a Fulbright, which I had done before knowing that my CKD would progress, which is a program that allows you to go internationally to study at a university for free. It's very competitive. And so I applied, and I actually was selected to be a Fulbright. But what that entailed was moving full-time to a different country. And I was at the point where I knew in the next few months I would have to start dialysis. So here's the meaning and belonging in the bargaining is I chose to pass on the Fulbright to give that opportunity up for free education, my dream, because I wanted to prioritize my health and be close to a transplant center in the US. Instead, I negotiated with myself, and I had also applied to do my graduate degree at Cambridge, which was a lifelong dream of mine. And so I decided to go forward with that option, not knowing what the outcome would be, but because I was paying for it, it was distance learning and there was some flexibility, distance learning for part of it. So I didn't sacrifice everything. It's part of my identity, but I really had to negotiate with my health, settle on that, as well as managing. I was working full-time. That's part of the licensure, as I was in the part where I was working full-time as a therapist, which is quite draining work. My physical health became, I have here, as in my notes, you don't look well. I would get that a lot. Began to become apparent. I had pretty bad neuropathy, shooting pains through my hands and my feet all the time. I couldn't hold my hands. As I got further on, my hands would just freeze up and I would have to pull them back. I play cards and I'd have to get a special holder for all of them because I couldn't hold them in my hands. More hospitalizations, erectile dysfunction. I actually decided to go on a pump here, really trying to fight it as much as I could. But you know what? During all of it, my body adjusted. I actually felt okay. my body, it's amazing how resilient your body is and how much it just adjusts. This was every day for me. And this is also where the transplant list came in. The best thing I ever did in this process was speak with others, listen to others who had gone through the process, not only the dialysis process, but the transplant process. There's a lot to know about it and a lot of decisions you can make that will have a huge, huge impact, including I mapped out all the centers. Luckily, my husband is very, very thorough and immediately had a spreadsheet of all of the centers and their admit rates and their success rates and all of this. So I had to make some tough decisions. I almost moved to Arizona by the Mayo Clinic and just gave up my practice completely because I can't practice outside of California while I'm training. So we had to do these different things. I mentioned this process too. I think it's really important to know that I entered this process as a type 1 diabetic, which is different than entering it as a kidney patient. I'm a kidney and pancreas patient, so the wait list time is significantly shorter. In California, it's 10 years for a kidney typically, and less than 2 years for a kidney and pancreas. So I had an advantage that was in a bit of a different spot there. I also saw it, for me, as an opportunity for a cure. So because my CKD was a symptom of my type 1 diabetes and rapidly accelerated by it, a cure for type 1 diabetes, which I'd never heard of in my life, getting a pancreas that worked, but a cure for type 1 diabetes by extension would mean that my CKD would be very, very, very minimal, if not undetectable. So it was an interesting process for me and a dire one at that. Okay, stage 5. We are here in transplant limbo. ESRD, you're on the wait list. Relationships, very strained. Became mostly in my house. I was no travel at all because I was on the wait list. Very restricted. I started PD immediately. So at 19 was a number for me that changed everything. When I got to 19, I was able to go on the wait list. I was able to start PD. So I did all of that, which severely restricted me. My body led the charge. All that I was doing was hoping to let my body get by here. I would feel awful if I didn't do dialysis. And even if I did, I had extreme nausea, insomnia, itching, still a bunch of swelling, weight gain. I gained about 20 pounds, which is odd for me. I've never gained that. I've always been within the same 5 pound weight in my life. Loss of fitness, the specific diet, the renal diet that I had to be on. Actually even got peritonitis while I was traveling. My first foray into traveling, I got peritonitis, and that was the most pain I've ever felt in my entire life. Wouldn't recommend it to anybody, but nevertheless, it was very straining. Psychologically, I felt even more alone, but also this odd sense of acceptance, which was counterintuitive. I think that's the thing too, being a kidney patient, is it's counterintuitive to accept it because it's against what medicine has been advocating and advising you to do, right? It was always something that you have to fight against, that you have to fight back. At least that's how I came to view it. But really, the acceptance that I found was really surprising in stage 5, ESRD. And it kind of went against what I had been told and thought. And being there was good, I think, in a way I had to be as well. Being on the wait list, there's considerations with illness as well as psychological cases. I had to make sure that I was sound and had all my boxes checked, or else I may be taken off the wait list. I may not be a candidate for a transplant. Here, I found a lot of security in my medical team. I found a whole community online that changed everything for me. Facebook groups, Reddit groups, I'm still part of, but a community of other people going through dialysis and who are on the wait list. I found love and support from those around me as I accepted it. And, I did have pity, which was something I was afraid of, but I only had pity from those who didn't matter anymore. Pity from those who really just kind of fell away, and that's okay with me. I think it really increased or narrowed my sense of belonging and meaning because it made me realize what was important to me, what wasn't. My life was far different than expected. Definitely different than expected. I was waking up at 2 a.m. to do online classes in the UK and then coming back and doing a work day. I was still working. I decided to try to work on PD, bringing bags into my office, sitting there with clients and having the dialysis bag, right, as I'm dialyzing. And so definitely not as I had expected it to turn out. I eventually had to stop work because it was too much to do all of it, and it's too much of a strain on my body. Until, next slide. Transplant. So on 11/11 at 11 p.m. in 2021, I went under for the transplant at Cedars-Sinai. So I was on the wait list for about 10 months. Was in the hospital for 2 weeks after a kidney and pancreas transplant. Transplant for me now is the gift that guides every day with gratitude, every day. There may be questions about transplant that you have, and I'm happy to answer any of them here. Otherwise, I will also include my contact information, by the way. But without getting too far into the transplant itself, it, more than anything, psychologically, it was relief. It was freedom for me and relationships and travel and being able to be athletic again and my career opening and my own self-esteem, my own independence. The biggest adjustment wasn't physical. The recovery wasn't fun, but the biggest adjustment was by far psychological. My way of thinking, long term, but also just psychologically had just 100% shifted. I had been knocked off my chair and had to learn to stand again. And that has changed everything and affected is a lot of relearning. And it's something that isn't really mentioned a lot when you think about transplant, or even more importantly, how it is that you've gotten on that chair to begin with, and the chair that you're sitting from, what it is like to carry this invisible thing before. And I didn't realize until after it was gone, wow, all of these things had shaped how I was thinking, what I was doing. That was a huge shift for me. And physically, yeah, it feels wonderful for me compared to being on dialysis. And yes, it actually can be better for sure, but you aren't going to have the best or what it used to be. And I've accepted that. You still carry around invisible weight. But for me, the acceptance has pulled through and the gratitude has pulled through. Every morning I have an altar and I thank my donor for the gift of transplant. And I sit there for a few minutes in pure gratitude, and that shapes my day, and that's such a gift. Not all of my issues have gone away. Now it's managing the symptoms on this side of transplant, which are from the anti-rejection medications. For me, are acne, anxiety, and bone loss, all things that I hadn't suffered from before. The tools are still there, and it's a strength, though. Honestly, it really always has been. Really, kidney patients and type 1 diabetics, transplant recipients, everyone in this process. Honestly, I've met so many, and they are the most invisibly resilient people that I've ever met. Next slide. Post-transplant, so that's me right now, what you see on the screen. Because of this whole experience, I pivoted. I'm dedicated to working with kidney patients and those around them professionally as a therapist, which is a skill that I'm so honored to bring to this community. knowing what it's like, not just understanding, but knowing what it's like to go through some of this. Having somebody to understand the nuances, the weight of what this means, the effects on our relationships. While a lot of my clients do talk about these things and are afflicted with chronic illnesses, and the thing is that it actually opens up to most other issues and dimensions of life. It's not the highlight, it's not who they are, but it's a big part of what they go through. And also caregiving. You probably know this, but thank your caregiver. Caregiving changes so much about you, about your relationship, about others, and it takes a huge toll itself. And to kind of put the cherry on my story, the biggest thing for me is I successfully defended my thesis and graduated with honors from Cambridge in October, which is next slide. And that's me. Probably look kind of small, but that's me walking graduation at Cambridge. Next slide. So a couple of ways to look at this is, one of them is through loss. Losing your kidneys. More than that, losing a part of you, losing a piece of you, losing yourself in that. It's what it can feel like a lot of the time. And as I was going through listing kind of the emotional things that I was feeling through all these processes, it's very similar to the 5 stages of grief. That is a common psychological model. It's been updated. Some people say it's 7 now, but they're stages of grief that don't necessarily go in an order. They tend to, but it's really grief for a loss of something inside of you. For me, in stage 1, starting with that denial, and then the anger of having it. For me, I was angry at it, and then I became angry at my doctor for not catching it until stage 2. And lots of anger there carried throughout. Depression, isolation, sadness, escaping, bargaining, which is the next step here, the next part in a process, and wanting it to be something different, thinking you can trade it for something else, or there's a lot more that you can do about it. What if this? And then lastly, acceptance. And this is somewhat of, this is one map to see that maybe speaks to your experience as well. Curious if some of the stages and even just the day-to-day of living in a stage goes for us. It's really it's a process of grief. Next slide. A direct way to look at this is the mental health symptoms of this for kidney patients is quite pronounced. 67% experience depression, and some studies even say higher, especially those on dialysis that are in center. 68% are not being offered a mental health support. So this is something that really goes neglected. It is hugely important, and while it's so great that the medicine behind it and the care behind it and the physical support is there, a lot of our mental health in the system is just not offered even, let alone addressed or acted upon. The mental support of a therapist or someone to help understand and navigate this is not even offered. So that's 68%. 36 can't fully take care of their physical health because of mental health problems. So these mental health problems affect a lot of things. And if you're in the arena of transplant, they will affect also even eligibility around that and the huge decisions that you have to make with your life leading up to transplant. 27% have considered self-harm or suicide as a result of their kidney disease. This is too much. 1% would be too much. 27 is, it's unacceptable. It's it's really serious and feels serious. And so kidney patients struggle with a lot mentally. Next slide. Another way that psychology can map onto this a little bit is the relationships. So this is a basic model of what a relationship dynamic looks like, with the two circles at the top being a pair. So say a couple, a mother and a father. And then below the triangle is a child. You could pretend that other circle isn't there right now. Just a simple dynamic, right? Where there's authority, care, responsibility, respect, all of these things that happen between a parent and a child, and between parents that are equal. As we become patients, our role can tend to, and may have to, fall from a partner or fall from an equal down to that of a child. You can be parentified, infantilized. You can have the same, be treated with the same responsibility and authority and everything else that comes along with being parented by somebody else. You can become on a lower level, on a different level, and then the entire system changes. So our roles, as our symptoms progress, as our disease progresses, change within the system, which changes everything completely. So it's something that's really important to notice is happening. And it doesn't have to do this. It doesn't have to, but it tends to. It's very easy to. So working with all parts of this system to make sure that it's somewhere that you feel empowered, that you feel respected, that you feel equal in, is really important, and something that this process does change. Next slide. So I'm really grateful, so grateful for the expertise, care, and knowledge around living with kidney disease and how far we've come. But the psychological resources, they do fall pretty disastrously short. So luckily, we do have a bunch that is at our reach, that may not be presented to you, but that is there for you. For a system that is built to focus on physical outcomes. But I wanted to list a few resources. These slides will be posted after for you, ones that you may not know about, but that were really, really helpful in my experience. Those are connecting with Facebook groups, PD groups, home hemo groups, kidney transplant groups, any sort of affinity group. You can find a Facebook group or a Reddit group for it, or you can connect with people on Instagram channel or TikTok. It's really, really a nice place. What I found is not only to get your questions answered faster than your doctor could answer them, but also a really, really great place to vent, to see what other people are going through. So to keep things in perspective and make connections. A lot of them I've stayed friends with, I've visited, and I've even kept in touch with after transplant. Forums and blogs on CKD. I mentioned Reddit. There are lots and lots of other bloggers and forums that follow this really closely, including any updates. The field is rapidly changing and progressing. So those are really interesting to keep abreast of. Patient advocate programs through your transplant and dialysis centers. There are people like me who have been through this. I am actually a patient advocate as well through my transplant center. But each one should have some sort of program like this where you can connect with people who are going through or have been through the process. And that's extremely helpful, extremely. Other kidney patients, your closest resource, you probably interact with a few. They're a great chance to be heard. They're going through it too. Psychotherapy, not one that I think a lot of people think about, but for me, relationally, for my meaning, it was vital and important to be able to lift some of that weight for me, to be seen for part of it. And I think if you can find a psychotherapist who really can truly understand you, or even who specializes in chronic illness, is is vital for mental health. Your transplant center will probably have resources for this. If not, or dialysis center will probably have referrals as well. If not, you can always search online, Google Psychology Today. The dialysis patient citizens, the kidney chat, it's a monthly phone group. Call in, access that. Lots of podcasts. There's lots of podcasters who are in the kidney space, always interesting information, always stuff to think about, ways to put it in perspective. The Kidney Citizen magazine, which admittedly I didn't read until after transplant, but reading it now, there's so many times where I read that or other kidney magazines, and I'm like, oh, I wish I would have known this or read this before. It would have been so helpful. So I highly recommend, especially if they're free or come with membership, sign up for those. It's a fun little treat to get in the mail or in the email. And lastly, there's a lot of quality of life, so specifically focused on your well-being resources in the section for the DPC. Next slide. I think that's it. Here's my contact information. It will be posted in slides afterward. I can also post it in chat for anybody who, for some reason, couldn't see the slides. But I do conduct psychotherapy, both in my office and virtually. In my office, I actually work with a therapy dog as well and do walking therapy, but virtual is fine too. I specialize in patients with chronic illness. So it's my mission here as a patient, my kidney patient myself. I love kidney patients, as well as anxiety and relationships. I typically work with all life issues though, but those are what I really like to focus in. My phone number and email, if you'd ever like to reach out for a consult, or honestly just to reach out to chat, to ask a question. I'm very responsive and open to anything. And I think that's it. So we will move on to any questions or comments that you have. Please type them in the chat box. And thank you for bearing with me and listening to what I had to share with you, my story.
Hey, Gabriel, this is Kathy. Thank you so much for such a great presentation and sharing so much of yourself. I have not seen questions yet, but as we're waiting, a comment I wanted to make was I really liked one of your first slides. You talked about the ownership of your diabetes, and that just struck me as, okay, the ownership, that's such a powerful and positive statement, I think. And maybe that's another way to look at some of these things, ownership of what chronic illness we have. So that kind of was meaningful for me. So thank you for that aha moment. And I still don't see questions, so I've got another one for you. It's kind of twofold. So you talked about two things that I wanted to just ask you about. Sometimes it sounded like you physically were looking poorly and not healthy. And so that made me wonder, one, did you tell your friends that you had kidney disease, and what was that like? And so that's one question. My other question is, you also talked about perhaps feeling invisible. And so if you were not at times looking unhealthy, but you were still dealing with all of the health issues, what was that like, and how did you balance that in your life?
Well, great questions. So I will answer the first one. And if people told me that I was looking unwell, disclosure is another tricky thing with us, especially because at stage 4, when I was really beginning to start to feel the effects and you could see them, I didn't necessarily have, I had devices in me for diabetes that could be well hidden, that weren't obvious, but I didn't have my I had PD, so I had the catheter coming out of my stomach, right? That was a very obvious tube, but I didn't yet have that. So disclosure was an option to me, and I chose not to disclose most of the time because I think explaining all of that, and also the fear of then becoming a patient or becoming oh, well, then what do people say with that? Like, what do people say to that? It makes things a little awkward, and there's nothing that a lot of other people can do. So I didn't want it to put a strain in my relationships or a kink in them. And that was my choice. It was a personal thing. And so when people said I looked unwell, I usually would just maybe leave it at that. I would say, okay. Unless it merited, like, for instance, some of my professors, I would tell because it affected other things. But otherwise, it's a tricky thing to navigate. What are people supposed to do with that? What do you hope by telling people that? The second part of your question, Kathy, was, can you repeat it again?
Sure. Were there times, I thought that you had mentioned feeling invisible at times.
Yes.
And could you just make a comment on how did you balance your life with feeling invisible to others yet dealing with the stuff going on?
Oh, I don't know. I still don't know the answer to that question. Yeah, it was this discrepancy in me, this polarization of always feeling invisible, like I was going through something a lot more, but no one could see it or understand it. I think until the stage 5 of just complete acceptance, and I had the tube before meeting up with people. I also had to do certain preparations and was very limited. So it was really just an upfront disclosure of, hey, I'm on dialysis. I have to go, I have to be home by 8 p.m. to plug in for 12 hours. And I have this thing, so I can't go for a swim with you, and I can't do. So I think that I didn't feel less alone, but maybe just the upfront disclosure helped with that feeling of acceptance. The invisible is a really tough one. I think that it was addressed. I felt like I was less invisible, and maybe that's where it was helped most, is in these online forums, Facebook groups, people that I knew were going through it as well. I think that if I would have had a professional who would have been through it, or either psychological or even medical, that's something I also ran into, is I've never had an endocrinologist or nephrologist who has been through any of these things that I've been going through. So it also felt it kept me invisible.
Okay, thank you for sharing that. If you look in the chat box, there are a few questions in there. The first one by Thomas is about how long since you've had your kidney transplant, and are you still taking meds?
Great. By Thomas, there was one before that, Deborah. So we'll go back to that one. But by Thomas, how long have I had my kidney transplant? So it was October. So I'm a year and 2 months. Yes, I'm taking meds. They are at a maintenance dose. I actually, so I'm taking tacrolimus, I'm taking Myfortic, and I'm taking prednisone. The prednisone is necessary for my transplant clinic, but because I'm also a double transplant recipient, so I've gone down to the lowest dose possible, which right now is 2.5 milligrams per day. But those meds are twice a day for the rest of my life. I'm also taking meds for, to be completely clear, I'm also taking meds for my, to manage my bone density, as well as my anxiety. And those are daily. Can we go up to Deborah's question here?
Sure. Do you want me to read them, or do you want to just go through them?
I can read it. Yeah. So
Okay.
Deborah, appreciate the info and personal experience. How is your diabetes now after pancreas transplant? Are you off insulin? Yes. Diabetes is non-existent. So no insulin, no anything. I have to check it periodically. My blood sugar, but it's always between 80 and 110. It's kind of crazy. My pancreas started working immediately. My kidney started working immediately. The pancreas took about 2 weeks. It was like a little child learning to walk. So it would be wild, and I'd have some lows and highs as it was learning to naturally adjust, because it's actually not even my pancreas. So it had to learn to do that in a new body. But after 2 weeks, it has been not budging. So pancreas is doing really well. Anne, hi Anne. What can you say about your addiction struggles and your dialysis staff? Did you keep it quiet because of stigma or other concerns? How did you navigate that with your partner? I think a lot of us battle quietly, yes, but may feel out of place in traditional 12-step programs because we have extra baggage with the CKD. Wonderful, wonderful question. Yes, so much of it's true. I'm very open and honest with all of my medical team. I have the privilege of feeling safe and comfortable in the medical setting with my team. I know that they're for the best of my health, so I was completely open with them in my usage, and that they really, and specifically I say usage, but my drinking here. And while it was tempting to keep quiet, I did not. It is a huge stigma though, and it was very, very difficult not to keep it quiet. My partner is also aware of this. So it has been a huge thing to navigate in our relationship, not only, especially because of the health ramifications and correlations with diabetes and CKD. However, I've come out of it on the other end, and I'm sober, gotten through that right now. And a lot of us do battle quietly. I'm certainly not the only one to do this. It's really hard not to. Really hard not to. Traditional 12-step programs, yes, do feel out of place. Some people, I think that there still is a place in them. For me, it was part of my story, but it's not the end of my story. There are certainly resources, and I'm happy to point you to some more where you can navigate drinking, using any sort of addiction actually with kidney disease and CKD, where that feels very accepted. And again, you can contact me, or I'm happy to point you to those resources. Okay, Thomas, are there any restrictions on what to do or not to do after transplant? Yes. They are stricter as you're closer to transplant, but after a year out, even 6 months out, there's really not that much. I'm not physically limited at all. The only limitation is that I'm unable to miss a round of medication, and I'm also unable to eat just very particular foods, which is only a couple. Do I still have issues with neuropathy? No. To my surprise, I actually have this sheet of paper before I have all of my conditions that were on my medical chart. And after transplant, I actually I went through and I was at the doctor's office and got to update it. And I crossed every single one of them off besides one. So do not have any neuropathy or retinopathy. A lot of my symptoms before have improved. That said, I still have to manage the symptoms on this side, right? So the things that come with the anti-rejection medications, but physically, No neuropathy. I'm a super fan of skydiving. Maybe. Why not?
Well, great. Right. Put that on your list of things to do, right? Perhaps. Gabriel, thank you again for sharing your story, all the information that you've given us. I'd like to thank everyone with us today. Thank you for sharing the hour with us. Please complete the feedback form, letting us know what you like, what other topics you would like. And please join DPC on February 23rd at 2 p.m. Eastern. We will have a webinar on weather emergency preparedness and a number of different kinds of weather emergencies. So we hope to see you then. And thank you all for coming. Gabriel, thank you again.
Thank you. It was a pleasure.